Chwala wam moc, chwala organizatorom filologicznych dni. I will switch into English now because obviously my Montenegrin is kind of limited and influenced by my Czech, so I can cheat my way through probably in everyday conversation, but not in a scholarly lecture. So today I would like to tell you about my new book, which was 10 years in making, and I feared it will never reach the readers because at one point only Brill was interested to publish it, and as you know, Brill prices their books at a very high level of 200 euros, 300 euros, so who can afford to buy it? So I was happy that the Central European University took up the publication of this atlas, so it is kind of sanely priced now at 70 euros, which is still a lot of money. Yet, I was really overjoyed to hear that they decided to open the series of open access book with this atlas. So now everyone can access this atlas if you want for your students or for your own research. You can put it into Google search, the title Words in Space and Time, and this platform Muse, and you get instant access to this book if you want. So, the book, when I started it, I discussed the idea of the book with the late Eric Hobsbawm, and he really saw a potential in it, so it helped me to get some grants. It's maybe you know or not, but getting grants in the Western academia for making maps, it's very difficult after the 1970s. So that's why very few scholarly atlases appear. Then some other people also like this idea and appreciate this idea of this atlas highly. I won't be going into praises. I would rather see some critical reviews and people finding white spots in this atlas so future scholars can know on what to improve. How did this atlas start? Basically, I've been doing research for the last 3 decades. The first decade I devoted to researching my home region, transnational, transborder, cross-border region of Upper Silesia, where I was born, raised, and educated, because at the beginning of the 90s, being an academic was a very poor way of earning a living, and I had to have several second jobs. So basically, I was doing academic stuff on weekends. And I decided, okay, I don't have any grant to go anywhere, so I will just research the place in which I was. And this brought me to a big clash with ethno-linguistic nationalism in Poland, because when I defended my work in Poland in 2001, at my home university in Opole, there was this reaction. He is writing and interpreting incorrectly the Polish history of Upper Silesia. I was thinking, what's going on? The history was multicultural. The Polish history of Upper Silesia kind of started after 1945, you know, seriously. But the university decided to write roughshod on me and do a bit of character destruction, so I had to leave Poland, maybe for the best, and got my job at St. Andrews, and I can do research and just have one job, so at least one kind of positive outcome out of this grief. But I was faced with the political and normative force of ethno-linguistic nationalism, and I started thinking really hard about it. Yeah? And I came to the conclusion that historical developments in the modern period in the region of Central Europe or Central and Eastern Europe, depends how you define it, are dictated by ethno-linguistic nationalists. People believe in this region of Europe that there are things like languages, that speakers of language X constitute nation X, and this nation X have the right to its own unshared with other nations nation state. And you can see it, obviously the implementation of ethno-linguistic nationalism, especially after the First World War, happened on a big scale. There are some kind of examples which do not follow it fully, but it is the rules of the game in this region of Europe. And you know, me teaching it at St. Andrews, I have to explain to students that when people say the English word nation, and these people, your interlocutor comes from Central Europe, he or she doesn't mean state, as you do. They mean basically a group of people speaking a language. Huh? And it goes the other way around. So moving countries, moving different zones of socio-political ideas also confronted me with the necessity of explaining this region to readers, potential readers in the West, and potential students in the West. So this book, The Politics of Language and Nationalism in Modern Central Europe, I worked on it for 10 years, was published in 2008, I guess. I gave a copy to the faculty, so you can have a look at it. Kind of explains the rise, the implementation, the mechanics, the dynamics of ethno-linguistic nationalisms as the rules of political game nowadays in Central and Eastern Europe. Now I should write another part about the Ruski Mir, because Ruski Mir ideology is basically the appropriation of ethno-linguistic nationalism for Russian, as a weapon of Russian neo-imperialism. Okay, so the book was finished, and when it was finished, Peter Berg appreciated it, as you can see, and we ended up with 1,200 pages. That's a lot. Yeah. Students don't like reading it, probably scholars can refer it. It's kind of encyclopedia. So then Palgrave asked me, you know, to write something shorter, something snappier, which people could read in one evening. So I wrote another book, Creating Languages in Central Europe During the Last Millennium, which is basically 50,000 words, so it is like 150 pages, yeah, so it is not so long. And I use this opportunity also to cover the emerging, at the time, sphere of the politics of language in cyberspace. Yeah? It is a big thing, you know, like here in this country, there was once a Montenegrin Wikipedia, Serbian hackers destroyed it, and now it's not here. Yeah? So that's language politics in cyberspace. Cyberspace, which nowadays is the battlefield of hybrid warfare in a big way. And my latest monograph, which is here, The Politics and the Slavic Languages, I kind of devoted it to the development of these ideas about the Slavic languages and the use of them for politics, including one special chapter on the Russian language as an imperial language, but I wrote it and published it before the war, yeah? So you could say it was forward-looking. And I gifted a copy of this book to Novica, so people at the faculty probably can share and have a look if you are interested. But these books moved me to this atlas because, because I wanted to make all these concepts, which are sometimes difficult to express in words, to show them to the people so they could see this concept at work at the first glance. So I decided to develop these kind of maps, which would be depicting, obviously not the geographical reality, but this kind of socio-political reality happening in a given political space. And I decided to have map series, which would give a continuity, a kind of a narrative to the atlas. So, like the changes in dialect continua through time, the changes in the different writing system used in the region through time, and so on and so on. I will show you examples. And some thematic maps, one-off maps, as you could call them. For instance, I wanted to develop a map of Central Europe in Romani, the language of the Roma. But I had difficulty to find the material, so I developed, in cooperation with some other scholars, a map of Roma settlements in Central Europe nowadays. An essential and rather big book within this atlas is not maybe big but substantial, is glossary. Glossary of these concepts, which to people in the West look very familiar: nation, state, language, you name it, but these concepts mean sometimes starkly different ideas and phenomena in Central and Eastern Europe. So you could say that this glossary is a kind of an attempt at a Begriffsgeschichte of important concepts of politics and society in the region of Central Europe, and in turn, this glossary explains the basic concepts which I'm using in the atlas, so not to repeat myself. Last but not least, the atlas has the index of place names, because sometimes a name of a city is given through time, is given in multiple linguistic forms, which once again is very baffling to people in the West, because London in the 12th century was London, 13th century London, 18th century London, today London. Yeah? Nothing changes. But Bratislava, what today is Bratislava, was Preszpork, Pożoń, Pożony, Wilsonowe Mesto, Bratislava. So the story is different. That's how ethno-linguistic nationalism works. Midway through the work on this atlas, when I was in Japan at the Central European Slavic Eurasian Research Center at Hokkaido University, some colleagues, some interested scholars had a look at the concept of my atlas, whatever, some 10 sample maps which I had already completed by that time, and they shared their reactions. And it is quite an important book, because it shows you that producing an atlas of socio-political phenomena requires certain choices. These choices are not obvious, and you could say they are not objective. Yeah? So I'm not hiding it. I'm telling you what kind of choices I made. Now, I start with the glossary. It's a map, it is an atlas of language politics in modern Central Europe, so you need to define Central Europe. So I'm defining Central Europe. But the definition continues. You don't see the entire thing because it would be taking up too much space on the slide. But basically, I say Central Europe is this part of Europe where ethno-linguistic nationalism is the dominant form of nationalism for statehood creation, statehood legitimation and statehood maintenance. And you have a sample map, so that's how it looks like. The map, if I reproduce it on the slide in whole, it is not very legible, so I will actually use further through the presentation fragments of such maps. So, dialect continuum, most of you are linguists, so I won't be kind of going into the definition of it, you know what it is. We have South Slavic dialect continuum from the Black Sea down to Slovenia. And I start presenting dialect continua from during the last millennium, very sketchily at the beginning, because obviously there is a lot of I mean, we don't have exact data in the past, so it is a kind of supposition that it was like this. And you have a fragment with my home region of Silesia, yeah, so you can place the region where it is. Actually, I was born at the very southeastern end of this region, which nowadays is split between Poland and the Czech Republic. Apart from maps and the glossary, each map is accompanied by explanatory essay. Yeah? So each map usually have an essay of 3,000 words, and I explain what's happening on the map, what is the story on the map, and when I made some choices, because in map you cannot just leave empty space, yeah? You have kind of to fill it in with data, and if you don't have data, you kind of cheat. So I don't cheat, I'm explaining in such an explanatory text why I made such a choice, or rather a guess. So another series of maps are writing systems. It is kind of a forgotten area in language politics. I call it the politics of script. And I've been asking several colleagues here, you have this newspaper Pobieda, which is pro-Montenegrin, and others, other Dan, which is not pro-Montenegrin. Pobieda is published in the Latin alphabet. Dan is published in Cyrillic. However, when Montenegro announced independence, Pobieda was also published in Cyrillic. So, as someone told me, 10 years ago or so, Pobieda made the switch. Why? The story is the story of the politics of script, and should and could be told, and because the politics of script is as important, especially in a polyscriptal or multiscriptal area like the Balkans or Central Europe, as language politics. So the series of writings, of maps depicting writing systems actually shows that in the past there were a lot of scripts in Central Europe, like 10, and nowadays there are 3. Yeah? Just Latin script, Cyrillic, and the Greek script. Now thematic maps. Yeah? There is something like Yiddishland. People after the Holocaust, somehow they are not surprised that a language with 8 million speakers at that time, during the wartime, equal in the number of speakers to Dutch, disappeared. The publications, millions of copies, tens of millions of copies of books and journals were burned, destroyed. And we speak after the Second World War about Judeo-Christian traditions and values for Europe, but in Europe there is not a single dedicated Yiddish language library. There are just 2, and obviously they are in the US. That's how strange it is. So that's why it's such a, if I may say so, to confront scholars with this lacunae in research and in reflection. Part and parcel, unfortunately, of the dynamics of the implementation and the use of ethno-linguistic nationalism is ethnic cleansing. Because if you establish an ethno-linguistic nation state, it says Poland is a nation state for Poles, and Poles are members of the Polish nation. Who are members of the Polish nation? People who speak Polish. So, per definitione, those who do not speak Polish needs to be kicked out. Yeah? And that's been happening in a big way all over. So you have a whole series of such maps. Here you have just a fragment of ethnic cleansing in the northern part of Central Europe during World War I and in the aftermath. We very often speak about language groups, so-called families. Obviously, it is organicism and biologists to talk about families of languages, because languages are not families, and languages do not have sex and do not produce offspring, so-called sister languages, and languages do not die because they do not live. Yeah? They are product of human ingenuity, created, maintained, and abandoned by human groups, and changed by human groups. So obviously languages can be classified on the basis of their similarity, like Slavic languages. They are pretty similar to each other, so they constitute a group. But especially in the Balkans, a real linguistic started. Languages of different kinds, because speakers of these languages have been living with one another for a millennium or more. There is a switch of influences between these languages. So for instance, in Greek you have a definite article, in Slavic languages you don't, but in Bulgarian you have, and in Macedonian. Yeah? So that's how such things happen. So there are some linguistic areas maps which I included, and then I kind of give the definition of ethno-linguistic nationalism in the operational form. I use the terminology from physics, normative isomorphism of language, nation, and state. Isomorphism, basically, it's a term for tight overlapping of several things. Yeah? And what ethno-linguistic nationalism is the overlapping of language, nation, and state. That's why isomorphism. Yeah? Why normative? Because it is the norm. It is the quote-unquote normal or prevailing form of nationalism as practiced nowadays in Central Europe, so-called modern Central Europe. And I give you several maps showing how it changes, that some countries are more isomorphic, or they are more faithful, quote-unquote, to ethno-linguistic nationalism or not. Obviously, you cannot see the story because I give you just sample of the maps, but you can access this atlas and see for yourself. Another thematic map, Romanistan. Roma are the Europe's largest stateless minority of 10 to 12 million people, and there is not a single school in all of Europe with Romani as the language of education. How strange, yeah? And once again, there is not really reflection on it. Yeah, we have to help Roma. Oh, Roma do not deserve, quote-unquote, our help, yeah? Roma and us, like kind of races, white and black, yeah? So I here show a fragment of this map of the settlements of Roma, the most important ones, using, when available, names of the settlements in Romani. And we are arriving now at a slide showing you how the glossary works. So the glossary is cross-reference. Basically, you can see that the terms in bold are referring to separate entries in the glossary. So it works like hypertext, and you can read this glossary for getting an idea of the network of concepts which spring from one another or influence one another and constitute, quote unquote, the political mindset in Central Europe, which is maintained and reproduced through the mass media and through education. Just to give you an example, it's one of the early research projects of mine, which also led to this one. Even in this country, in Montenegro, there is a school historical atlas used as a textbook. Yeah? Historical atlases as school textbooks, as a genre of school textbooks, exist only in Central Europe. They don't exist anywhere else in the world. And I was thinking about it, why? And now the answer is pretty obvious. For children, it is extremely demanding and difficult process to get the idea of normative isomorphism. That there is such thing like a language which you cannot see, but which exists, and which has borders here and here, and people speaking this language actually constitute a nation. So, okay, language, nation, I cannot see that stuff, but it exists, okay, fine. And then there is national revival, and these nations win nation states, and the borders change, and there are a lot of wars, and borders change again, and people are moved from one country to another, expelled or massacred. Yeah? This requires a lot of mental space in your head to get the idea of the story, and and even more to realize it is your story, your national story. Yeah? Like in the United States, they just need one map in a history textbook how the United States grew territorially. Nothing really is changing. Obviously, such a presentation of American history erases all the American ethnic groups which were put into 300 reservations. They are not shown in official textbooks. Okay. Now, I come from Upper Silesia. The Silesian language in Poland, according to the official censuses, is the second largest. But Poland being run according to ethno-linguistic nationalism is very good at protecting ethnic and national minorities when they are insignificant, have 300 numbers of members, or they do not exist. Like in Poland, there is the Tatar minority. So the Tatar language is protected, but Tatar language was never spoken in Poland, and it's not spoken in Poland because the Tatar minority is defined through Islam, and since the 14th century have been speaking Slavic. Yeah? So the Polish state can protect Tatar language and ensure its development because it does not exist. Cool. Looks very, very nice in paperwork sent to the Council of Europe. Yet, Silesian is the second largest by the number of speakers language in Poland. According to the statistics, it's around 400,000 people. Still not a large number, but in this region where I live, considerable. So I decided, just for the fun of it, to develop a map of Central Europe in the Silesian language. Yeah. So it is in an international kind of book used in English, used by scholars from all over the world. Now, last but not the least, I told you that I started this atlas with the intimation that Central Europe is the only area in the world where you have clusters of ethno-linguistic nation states run according to what I call the normative isomorphism of language, nation, and state. Basically, this doesn't happen anywhere else. Yet, I started looking across the world, and I noticed that language is used for statehood legitimation and for politics to a varying degree across Eurasia. It is not used outside Eurasia. And then I spotted this second cluster of ethno-linguistic nation states in East Asia, or in Southeast Asia, you could say. So Japan kind of reminds me of Germany and Italy as early ethno-linguistic nation states in Central Europe, while the cluster of these ethno-linguistic nation states in Southeast Asia emerged after the Second World War. Yeah? So it's a very interesting historical sequence. The cluster of ethno-linguistic nation states in Central Europe emerged after the First World War. Wilson, the Inquiry, the famous book, The Boundaries of Languages and Nationalities by Léon Dominian, which was read by Wilson as a Bible and his inquiry. So they were using, okay, languages here, so nations here, state borders here, fine. Yeah. So I was thinking, what happened in Asia that after the Second World War they got this idea? Well, I applied to the ERC for a project to properly research it. I was unsuccessful, but hopefully in the future some scholars will be interested in it. But and will try to find out evidence answers. But at this moment I can say Japan is a pretty clear case of the transfer of political know-how. They copied the imperial constitution, Meiji constitution of 1898, if I'm not mistaken, on the German constitution, which is completely ethno-linguistic in kind of sorting out the ideas of citizenship and so on. Everything is on the lineage, yeah, on the bloodline, yeah, on ethnic belonging. Japan, during the interwar period, was the center of anti-colonial activism for people from Southeast Asia. Many future anti-colonial leaders in Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos were educated during the war in Japan. So probably they brought these ideas down to Southeast Asia. Another possible channel is the so-called Koreanizacja process, the nativization process, which happened in the 1920s in the Soviet Union when they codified around 120 languages and they created republics based on ethno-linguistic principle, which actually spread ethno-linguistic nationalism eastward, because when the Soviet Union broke up, the 15 post-Soviet states are purely ethno-linguistic nation states. So that could be also one thing, because the Soviet Union through China during and after the Second World War was active in Southeast Asia, and well, communist states like Vietnam and Laos survive to this day. Last but not least, as I told you, there is this index which cross-references all the place names which I happen to mention in this atlas. So you can, probably you know all these complications, but Western readers will not be flabbergasted by the fact that Poziom, Pressburg, Bratislava, Wilsonowe Mesto is still the same place. Yeah? Thank you very much.